Okay, the real Wargamer here at the Wargaming table. This is a think piece. I have a number of different things that I've been thinking about that I will be looking at going over here. No particular order. All of this stuff isn't necessarily directly related to each other. And this is a think piece, so even though I have syntax Sagunto Wargame set out here, this video is not about this game. I do have it set out though because this is the game that I was thinking about when I thought about making this video, although I went on to think about a bunch of other things that are really far away from the game here. But this was what started it, that started the thinking that wow, those hex sides almost completely disappear in the mountains there. You can see them there, but as you go up the map that way, you get darker mountains that, I hadn't noticed that. Actually, I guess, I wonder how much fighting actually takes place in those mountains anyways. Okay. So this is a think piece which I'll be talking about, introducing that idea, I guess. I do want to say I have my coffee here, so I have to make sure that I don't get so animated. That I have a disaster here. Okay, so, oh wow, look at that. I randomly threw these dice out and they came up 100. That's good luck. Okay, a think piece. I do not do these. I haven't done one of these, or I don't remember doing one of these for a very long time. I don't really do them anymore. But I did want to say why, because it's not that I don't want to. So the reason why I don't is not obvious. So I'll go over that real quick and then move on. So this is a think piece. This is an opinion piece. I will be talking about things that I prefer in game design, things that I don't prefer in game design. And they are, the statements are by definition sweeping statements, and I'm sure that if I thought about it in every case, I could come up with an exception to what I'm saying, but still, I definitely, being, as I like to say, an advanced beginner, an experienced novice, a veteran newbie, I still am at a point to talk about some things. So why do I not do these anymore, really practically speaking? First of all, let me sweep away something up front. This has nothing to do with a reticence to commit anything to video. It has nothing to do with that. It also has nothing to do with getting any type of side feedback or commentary. Has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is purely practical. It has to do with, believe it or not, the time of day that I make my recordings. Earlier, really going back more than, essentially more than 2 years ago, I did I essentially did all my recording in the early morning. Actually in the early morning before I had really done anything else. In the Wargaming room, usually before sunup, and at that time I was doing a lot of thought pieces, and it's pretty obvious why, which I'll mention in a minute. Now I'm doing essentially all of my recording in the late evening, essentially the last thing I do in the day. And that has everything to do with with the videos. So the videos now and for quite some time, quite a long time, are very, just there's demonstration videos with actually very little commentary or analysis or anything like that. Whereas before they were heavy on thought analysis, commentary, whatever. Okay, this has to do with the physiological thing that I go with and I don't fight anymore. I probably tried to fight this when I was younger and less reflective. But now, basically, before noon is when I purposely schedule and try to work on anything that's creative, anything that takes original thought or thinking, analysis, creativity. I say creativity with respect to writing, not these videos. But where it comes to these videos, the morning before noon is when I would do some thought and analysis and record it if it's as appropriate. Afternoon is more a time for rote stuff, practical thinking, practical calculation, etc., etc. So the reason why I say that is because over the last couple of years, that when I have not been making these thought videos, thought pieces, I've been thinking of a ton of them. And time after time after time, I have been in the morning hours and thought, I want to put this on video, I want to talk about this, I want to record this, I want to compare these games and these mechanics and all this other stuff. And by the late evening, when I actually sit down to record, it's just not there. It's just not there as far as... What do I mean by that? I mean by that, if I make the videos that I thought about earlier in the day, I wouldn't be happy with them. Okay. So here I have, this is a think piece. I have actually, for the time being, I have broken down, and it's now in the early morning. So I actually adjusted my schedule to make this video in the early morning. So that's that. It's that there are a ton of things. There's so many things that I've wanted to do, put on video, do some game demonstration, link it to some analytical work, compare some historical commentary, first-person accounts with a war game, all this stuff, and it just hasn't been done, or certainly hasn't been committed to video, and it has only to do with the fact that I am video recording last thing in the day, and at that point I want to play. There's no problem there, but I guess it's just I just want to play. Okay. So what? Let's talk about wargaming. I guess in wargaming and being a wargamer. So one thing I've been thinking a lot of over the last year, off and on, is that I'm not a wargamer, and I'm not a wargamer. I don't think of myself a wargamer. I don't call myself a wargamer. I do think being a wargamer is a it's a mentality. And it's a mentality I guess I don't have. I'm not a wargamer. I enjoy war games in my free time. That's about it. I'm a career soldier. Enjoy it very, very much. Needless to say. And being a career soldier, and being a career officer, being and also being at this point a military analyst in uniform. That is what I am, and that's about as much of a connection that I can make to how I spend my free time. So I enjoy that my pastime, and it's nothing more than that, at least does not conflict or it at least does not conflict with professional pursuit. So professional pursuit, pastime. That's it. By the way, I don't expect that to change. I don't expect that change. Don't want it to change. So that's that. Now war games themselves, the mechanics, movement mechanics, combat mechanics, leadership morale, which I've talked about before. How do I put it? Well, let me start with the broader idea. There are many different ways to portray the reality. I'm going to talk about realisticness and realism. There are many different ways to portray the reality of combat, engagement, battle, campaign, operation, war. There are in fact many different ways to portray this. And from different portrayals, I think you can even get different ways to simulate and model the reality. Not that portrayal, simulation, and modeling are the same. I'm not saying that. Okay, so there are many different ways. And the classic example I like to use is Bonaparte at Marengo, because it's a game that I am familiar with. Apparently I'm horrible at it since I've never been able to win, but great game. And that's one of my exemplars to hold up for portraying battle in that case in a unique way. And I'm not talking about mechanics. I guess it makes it sound like I'm talking about the mechanics. I'm actually not thinking about the mechanics. I'm thinking about when you put all the mechanics together, the whole is a unique portrayal, a unique presentation. Okay. So there are many different ways. This being a think piece, several years ago when I had the time and opportunity, I experimented actually with this, and in fact there are totally different ways. There are even totally different, even inverse ways of doing what we are so familiar with. I do not want to beat that drum too hard. I really don't, because I recognize the flip side. The flip side is that if we devoted all our energy, all of our collective energy, to just coming up with different methods of portrayal, simulation, modeling, I don't think the outcome would be that good. So it's a balance. I think that we should pursue a balance between trying out creative, unique ways and continuing to develop, hone, and apply known tools. Known tools. Okay. So the reason why I mention that is to get to the whole idea of orders. Well, I guess I probably should talk about Sagunto here. I guess I'll do that in just a minute. Okay. What was I? Orders, yeah. I was actually watching a video of a game that uses what I'm going to say is an explicit order system, but not a literal orders mechanic design. What do I mean by that? I mean, and I don't dismiss any of these categories. I don't dismiss any of them out of hand. As a matter of fact, I've been thinking about the benefit of going back to what I perceive as a more traditional and certainly miniatures type orders system. And I guess, and again, I may be thrown off by, reading of this, having never done it, and certainly never done it back then. But I guess there was, in earlier generations of, I guess, miniatures, I mean, there was a, write out your order on a scrap piece of paper, fold it, put it under the table, and then, have your little, dispatch writer, I don't know, and have your little dispatch writer, ride across the battlefield, and arrive at the commander, and actually, transmit the order. That's what I mean by literal. And I'm not dismissing that out of hand whatsoever. I'm actually intrigued by the benefits of that. But anyways, it doesn't matter. That's just one way. So the other one, the one I'm talking about, that's kind of indirect. It's somewhat abstract. It's explicit but abstract, I guess is the way to put it. And that, of course, is the model that I think is quite popular these days, where you have your little orders chits. Sagunto, I don't think Sagunto has that. Not that I recall, but let's say this is an orders chit. Is it an orders chit? No, it's not no. So, the orders chit design. So this does what? This allows a lot of abstraction, while I think providing it provides a visual cue for sure, but it allows for, I think, some visualization of what's going on command-wise. And I emphasize this because, we don't really need any of this. We really don't. You can just as easily do a command system that is entirely, again, it's not abstract, because this can still be very abstract, but it can be entirely immaterial. In other words, there's nothing physical. You're just at some points in the game turn, you're consulting some tables, and you're rolling the dice, and you're just, again, you're determining the command state, but you're determining the command. State's a fine word for now. Okay, so I was thinking about the order system, and I was thinking that, which is why I was thinking about entirely different ways of looking at these things, because as I was watching this very, very good video, by the way, very good video, I was thinking, I'm not sure I prefer this system anymore. Maybe, I guess I could call it the musket and pike approach, which is not to say musket and pike. I think I still need to actually get to my first play, but from what I've read of the musket and pike series, I mean, sounds great, but I'll call it the musket and pike series, where you're putting your little advance order on there, and then you want to change to charge, and you're rolling to change it. I'm not sure I care for that anymore, because, and here's why. Let's let's abstract this. Let's say that this is, let's say that these are entire commands. All right, so we have our center, and we have our left over here, and we have our right over here. You know, these are abstract. So these are, you know, hundreds of counters on multiple maps, okay? But the reason why I'm not sure I care that much about this explicit but still abstract orders design approach is because when I'm playing the battle, what do I really care about? And this, by the way, does have, I believe, a real-world analog. What do I care about? I care about what the unit is doing. And, well, yeah, actually, I just care about what they're doing. Meaning, if I'm the overall battle commander here, I want my right flank, you know, to maneuver on the enemy. All I want to know is, are they doing that or not? And the reason why I emphasize that is because, again, now you take this unit, you break it down into hundreds of unit counters. Maybe what matters most to me is what each unit is actually doing. I've talked about this before, and this is why I'm referring to our, is this infantry? I think it's infantry. This is why I'm referring to the history of our designs, right? Okay. And I'm going to complicate this now because I'm going to add another dimension to this. So first of all, I want to know the most important thing is what that unit is doing. This unit here. Let's say this unit's part of the right here. Okay. Most important thing is what is the unit doing? And then I'm going to tie that to it escaped me. Let's see if it comes back to me. Okay, so I know it. It's the number of factors in play. Okay, so I am adding a whole other factor here to the discussion, but when we get back to complexity and detail, and I want lots of complexity and detail, and that's exactly what I want. Let's set detail aside because detail is actually one thing. Complexity, and I don't know if I ever committed this to video, but I know that when I was doing a little bit of game design for myself a couple years back, I know I clarified for myself, you know, a useful practical definition for complexity, which is not only the number of factors in play at any one time, but the number of interactions between those components, right? So you can have, so when you talk about complexity, right, you can have, let's just make it real simple and say there are 3 factors in play. That's one, I guess, point. But if there's only, let's say, a circular, you only go from, maybe I should do it that way. If you can only go from 1 to 2, you can only go from 2 to 3, and you can only go from 3 to 1, that's another point of complexity. And actually, I would say this is a low level of complexity. You know, you amp it up to, you know, from 1 you can go to 2 or 3, from 3 to 1 to 2, and I guess you amp it up again and say you can go, no, I'm sorry, the reverse would have already been accounted for. So that's a higher level of complexity. So I think in terms of the number of factors involved at any one time for our purposes in the game turn. What do I mean by that? Low complexity is the old, again, what I think of, you know, how accurate this is another question, but what I think of as the Avalon Hill SPI generation, which again, there are lots of exceptions, but you have a movement phase and a combat phase. You have a movement factor and a combat factor. And you have movement mechanics and combat mechanics. And let's take combat. Once you come in, once you come adjacent to an enemy in this old style approach, design approach, and in some games, combat's even mandatory. Let's take the extreme case, right? I use movement factor to move, become adjacent to the enemy. In the combat portion of the turn, mandatory combat. And when I see, this is actually a good example because there's one unit against one enemy unit. There are actually no decisions to make. Once the combat portion of the turn starts, especially in the case where combat's mandatory, you have no more decisions to make. In other words, there are no more factors involved. It is a combat factor of one unit compared against the combat factor of the enemy. That combat factor might be modified for terrain, maybe something else, but all of that involves no player decisions. In other words, there are a limited number of factors involved, and in some cases, very limited player decisions. I now prefer, and it is a function of complexity. I now prefer a lot of different factors involved, and especially when they're tied to player decisions. So, just to use a really, really, really simple example off the top of my head, not planned here at all. Like, I can choose to move or I can choose to move. Let's take move. I can choose to move cautiously. I can choose to move normally. I can choose to charge. I can, maybe I can choose to, formations. I can choose to do this in one kind of formation or choose to do it in another kind of formation. That's what I mean. That's just movement. We get into combat. I can choose to do a cautious attack, an all-out attack, whatever. I'm just coming up with stuff off the top of my head, but that's what I mean by, again, lots of factors involved, especially tied to player decisions. Okay. So I brought that in to talk about what really matters, right? So to use that as a basis for what I was saying earlier, and this is specifically a separate part of the battlefield, right? So I'm the army commander here. I cannot see. I cannot directly have any influence on what's happening on my right. But clearly, as a commander, there are things I want. Clearly, as a player, there are things I want done. The question is, do they do it? And this, again, is where we've had our traditional different approaches to command control. But then I'm thinking, well, maybe, again, go to the unit. Oh, I know it. So when we built off of how we've evolved our designs is that we have, right, that's why I brought up the factors involved, right? So what we've done, I don't have I wish I had examples to use here, but we have, well, I guess I'll use these as example versions, right? So we have created information markers, status markers, loss markers, right? We've added all of this to give us the idea of what the unit is doing. But still, we probably, to use a traditional design approach, we probably still have to have a command control phase. And in the command control phase, we're counting whether, the however you want to look at the corps commanders, within some radius of the army commander, and the division commanders within some radius of the corps commander, and all the way down. And then we're marking, some units out of command. And my point is, all that stuff is layered on. And one of the reasons why it appears to be layered on is because we are adding to a fundamental system of what? The fundamental, and this is what I'm getting at, the fundamental system only shows the unit. the fundamental layer of design doesn't just tell you directly, specifically, what the unit is actually doing. What do I mean by that? I mean, okay, let's flip it around and say, and I guess this does build off of my deep fascination with the Iron Cross series. I'll call it the Iron Cross series because that's the first one I played. But so here, let's grab an enemy. Okay, here's an enemy. So am I off the camera? Almost. So you as the player want this unit. You want this unit to fire, or you want it to pull back, or maybe you want it to do something else. But what is the unit doing? One of the reasons why this fascinates me is that, transitions aren't really accounted for. I'm sorry, you could say that they're accounted for, but they're not really, I'll say they're not factored in. It should be obvious what I'm talking about, but when we have the unit, when we have this unit march up, usually in one part of the turn, and then when we have this unit fire, usually in another part of the turn, not always, but usually, we don't account for the transitions, right? The transitions from going from stationary to moving, moving to stationary to, readying to fire, and then for readying to fire. And that's why I said, okay, it's accounted for in how we decide what our movement rates are and all that other stuff. But really they're not factored in very much at all, which takes me to, and I'll go ahead and mention it, my fascination with Rebel Yell. I don't know the Rebel Yell does it. I don't know the Rebel Yell does that as much as I would like, but playing Rebel Yell definitely gives me the idea of, transitions are important. And again, I'm going to go back to this is complexity and detail over simplicity and abstraction. When it marches up here, see, there should be a big difference between how well a unit transitions, again, from moving to firing. But in other words, what we're saying is, and I know that we can get into troop quality and stuff, and that is one way that it's been dealt with. And actually,